Shannon Sharpe says he's temporarily stepping away from ESPN in the wake of a $50 million lawsuit accusing him of rape. A woman filed suit against Sharpe on Sunday, accusing him of raping her twice.
And that this was about handcuffs, choking, putting on dog collars.
Do you get those?
The whispers started off small, just a soft rustle like the sound of dry leaves before a thunderstorm hits. Shannon Sharpe, the Hall of Famer turned media giant, was no stranger to making headlines. His loud personality and sharp, fiery takes had made him a star. But this time, the spotlight wasn't on his sports talk or big-name interviews. Nope, this buzz was way darker, something pulling the public's full attention and setting social media on fire. The man who had built his image on raw strength and dominance now stood smack in the middle of a scandal so massive, so explosive, it could wipe away everything he had worked for.
Alrighty, y'all. So the Shannon Sharpe ESPN, does he still keep his job conversation is beginning to, I was going to say beginning to happen, but it's been happening. But I think now it's beginning to get louder because of different things that Attorney Busby has released, including the audios. So right now the conversation is, why is Shannon Sharpe still able to be?
And if the latest whispers were true, Shannon Sharpe wasn't just battling for his reputation, he was straight up on the run. Word spread fast that Sharpe had yanked huge amounts of money from his accounts, reportedly draining his financial empire in one wild, sweeping move. The details were foggy, sure, but insiders were whispering that these money moves weren't random. They looked exactly like the kind of slick, calculated moves someone would make if they were planning to vanish without a trace. The streets were buzzing, fans were shocked, and the gossip circles were running non-stop. Was Shannon Sharpe really about to disappear from the spotlight, leaving behind his empire and his name? The tension was thick, and everyone wanted to know, what was he running from?
So are now beginning to bring up past things that have happened with Shannon Sharpe, including a temporary restraining order that was filed against him back in 2010 from a woman that he was dealing with at the time, who accused him of sexual assault. He said in different things. Now, this was dropped, it was dismissed.
Adding to the storm were the whispers of private jets, secret locations, and the sudden ghosting on social media. And for a man like Shannon Sharpe, who usually thrived in the spotlight, that silence hit hard. Fans and critics alike were left asking, where was Shannon Sharpe? And why did it seem like he was preparing to vanish without a trace? The accusations had been stacking up for months, each one wilder than the last. Allegations ranged from verbal threats to controlling behavior, all boiling over into a massive $50 million lawsuit filed by a woman only known as Jane Doe.
Easter Sunday, a lawsuit was filed in state court in Nevada against Hall of Fame tight end Shannon Sharpe because he has become such a massive media star, especially in the past few years. The lawsuit is going to attract.
Her claims painted a bone-chilling picture of manipulation and emotional control. And sure, Sharpe's legal team jumped to shut it all down, calling it a greedy cash grab. But the public wasn't so quick to forgive. They were hooked on every detail. And then came the audio. That gut-punching, stomach-twisting clip where a voice, allegedly Sharpe's, could be heard snarling, "If you say that word one more time, I'm going to choke the life out of you." In the world of public scandals, audio hits on a whole different level. It's raw, it's shocking, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. People weren't just reading headlines, they were hearing the ugly details straight in their ears, and it was shaking up the whole game.
Like the Deshaun Watson cases where there were 20 plus plaintiffs and they weren't really sure who the people were who were making the claims. In this case, Shannon Sharpe knows exactly who it is because there had been, and it's clear from the statement issued by his lawyer, Lanny Davis, there had been some pre-litigation efforts to try to resolve this.
Social media blew up into pure chaos with hashtags trending for days. Outrage flooded every corner of the internet, and armchair detectives took over, breaking down every second of that shocking clip and throwing out wild theories about what it all said about Shannon Sharpe's true character. Some fans held on tight to his defense, swearing that his big, larger-than-life personality was proof he could never be guilty of something so dark. But plenty of others weren't buying it. They pointed to the growing mountain of accusations as a clear sign that the man they had admired for years wasn't the hero they once believed. And through all this madness, Sharpe's silence started to speak louder than words. And not in a good way. Turns out Jane Doe wasn't the only one speaking up. Kel Bundy Evans, an ex-girlfriend, came back into the spotlight with her own jaw-dropping claims. She said their relationship started off sweet, full of charm and charisma, but quickly spiraled into something much darker. According to Evans, Sharpe wasn't just controlling. He was ready to go to extreme lengths to protect his public image. And it didn't stop there. There were whispers from other women, unnamed sources, even old colleagues from his time at S1, all hinting at a disturbing pattern of behavior.
We found out about the lawsuit against Shannon Sharpe. Now, this one has some very strong allegations: sexual assault, sexual battery, assault and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The sexual components obviously give it greater gravity than a car accident or any case based on some sort of negligent slip and fall, something like that, where someone was just being careless.
If even half of what was being said turned out to be true, the fallout would be absolutely devastating. The streets were buzzing, the fans were divided, and the truth, it was getting harder and harder to ignore. The legal team backing Jane Doe didn't waste a second. They came out swinging. Tony Busby, a lawyer known for tackling big-name cases, was leading the charge. And he had already shown he wasn't scared to play hardball. Busby's game plan was loud and clear: make the public care, make them pay attention, and make Shannon Sharpe sweat. Dropping that chilling audio was just the opening move. Rumors were already flying about what might come next. Text messages, photos, maybe even videos that could rip apart the polished image Sharpe had spent years building. Meanwhile, Sharpe's team was scrambling, working overtime to dismiss the claims as exaggerated or taken out of context. But the damage was already done. The story had spun out of Sharpe's hands, and that loss of control might have been the biggest blow yet.
Tony Busby says this is key evidence in our case against Mr. Sharpe, so it will not be coming out. He will not be leaking this.
And saying basically it's going to come out during the trial.
Right.
If there's a trial.
If there's a trial, it will come out, which to me sounds like he's still dangling it over Shannon's head to say, we can meet, we can settle this, or we can go forward into a trial, and then the video is going to come out.
As the legal war heated up, the public's eyes stayed locked on Sharpe. Every move he made, or didn't make, got picked apart in real time. When he decided to step back from his ESPN duties, reactions were split. Some people thought it was a smart move, a chance to focus on clearing his name, but others saw it as a bad sign, a move that only fed the rumors and raised even more questions. The drama was only getting juicier, and everyone was watching to see what would happen next. To some, it looked like an admission of guilt, a clear sign that the pressure was crushing Shannon Sharpe. And then came the wildest rumors yet, whispers about private jets, offshore accounts, and some secret island getaway started swirling, wrapping the whole scandal in a thick cloud of mystery. Was Sharpe really plotting to run? Or was this just another wild twist in an already messy, tangled saga? Nobody knew for sure, but even the possibility was enough to keep the gossip machine running full speed. The industry had its eyes locked on him, too. Shannon Sharpe wasn't just some regular sports analyst. He was a brand, a powerhouse, a cultural icon. His sudden exit from ESPN left a giant hole.
The news, Shannon Sharpe. So you guys remember that video that Shannon Sharpe was saying was going to release?
Yes,
That
it did.
No.
Oh.
One nobody seemed ready to fill. Sure, names were being tossed around as possible replacements, but none of them carried the same weight, charm, or electric energy Sharpe brought to the table. Behind the scenes, you can bet the executives were in panic mode, working overtime to quietly distance themselves from the scandal, while also facing the brutal reality they were losing one of their biggest stars. The stakes were sky high, not just for Sharpe, but for everyone tied to him. Reputations were hanging in the balance, and the fallout threatened to spread way beyond the sports world. This wasn't just about one man's downfall. This had the power to shake up the whole industry. And yet, for all the noise, all the wild rumors, and the endless outrage, one question hung heavier than anything else. What was Shannon Sharpe really hiding? The whispers of escape, the growing pile of allegations, the leaked audio, the lawsuits. They were all pieces of a puzzle no one had fully put together yet. But one thing was painfully clear. This wasn't just about a man fighting to save his career. This was a man fighting to save himself. As the scandal kept unraveling, people couldn't help but wonder, just how deep did this rabbit hole go? With every new headline, every explosive detail, a chilling pattern started to surface, one that painted an even darker picture than anyone was ready for. Because this wasn't just about one lawsuit or a single audio clip. It wasn't even about the latest wave of accusations spiraling out of control. No, this was about a history, one that had been quietly tucked away.
Another interesting thing too, and this is why I said, I've never seen anybody handle a situation worse than Shannon and his team after this came out. We would have never known about that so-called video if it wasn't for Shannon Sharpe.
Yes.
Shannon jumped out there and revealed that video existed. And he did that for no reason because they wasn't even planning on putting it up.
Swept under the rug for years. A history of whispers, allegations, and messy, unresolved incidents that all pointed to one brutal, unavoidable truth. Shannon Sharpe didn't just have skeletons in his closet, he had a whole graveyard hidden away. The cracks in Sharpe's polished public image didn't start with Jane Doe or Kel Bundy Evans. No, those cracks ran way deeper. They stretched back decades, tied to old incidents that had either been forgotten or, more likely, deliberately buried. Now, as those hidden truths clawed their way back to the surface, the question wasn't just about whether Sharpe could survive the scandal. It was whether the truth was finally ready to blow everything wide open. Take 1995, for example. That was the year a young, rising star, Shannon Sharpe, landed on the wrong side of the law after a heated confrontation turned physical. The details were fuzzy, like they often are when big public figures are involved. But one thing stood out. Both Sharpe and the woman were hit with charges.
It's a claim against someone alleging that some rights were violated, and in most cases what's sought is compensation in the form of damages to make up for whatever it is the person did. And there are all sorts of civil lawsuits, car accidents, defamation. We hear about that a lot because people get sued about things that are said about them in media.
Back then, it was brushed off as just a misunderstanding, a messy, he said, she said situation, and the world moved right along. But what if it wasn't just some random one-time thing? What if that moment was actually the first warning sign in a much darker pattern? What most folks didn't know, or maybe didn't care to notice, was that this so-called misunderstanding involved way more than just some shouting match. Digging through old local police records, reports showed the incident allegedly kicked off inside Sharpe's home, starting with a disagreement that quickly spiraled out of control. Furniture got smashed. Voices were raised so loud the neighbors ended up calling the cops. Witnesses said they could hear the yelling clear from the street. And when police showed up, both Sharpe and the woman were showing visible signs of a physical fight. Sure, the official charge was listed as simple battery, but there was nothing simple about the chaos described in those early reports. And just like that, in a pattern that would quietly follow Sharpe for years, the whole thing got wrapped up and smoothed over before the media could sink its teeth in. Nobody asked more questions, and Sharpe kept climbing.
Essence from Atlanta, him refusing to look at the evidence just gives me the impression that he wants plausible deniability, and maybe the evidence should be released so that way he does not deny his actions. I mean, if that was me, I would definitely want to look at the evidence to see what I did and did not do so I can maintain my innocence.
But now, looking back, it was hard not to wonder, was that the moment the cracks first began to show? Then came the 2004 incident, and it echoed the past with chilling similarities to what had happened nearly a decade earlier. This time, it was a different woman, another explosive situation, and yet another police report that would eventually vanish into the shadows of private settlements and public forgetfulness. What really jumps out about this case is how it was spun back then. Sharpe's legal team went into overdrive, painting him as the victim, claiming the accusations were overblown and hyped up by the media. But court records? They tell a slightly different story. According to the woman involved, Sharpe physically forced her out of his home in a way that left her feeling rattled and humiliated. The charges ended up being downgraded during mediation, and once again, the public was left scratching their heads with more questions than answers. Why did these situations keep getting swept under the rug? And worse, how many other incidents were out there that never even made it to court? Maybe the most unsettling part of all are the claims that never hit the headlines. Multiple former colleagues and acquaintances have quietly hinted for years about Sharpe's history of explosive temper tantrums and dominating behavior. But back then, those whispers were usually brushed off as gossip or straight-up jealousy.
They want everything to happen immediately.
Absolutely.
Like, it's only
It's
Thursday.
instant. They want everything to instantly happen. It doesn't work like that.
The righteous people on Reddit, baby, they are dissecting and divulging right now.
One former production assistant who worked with Sharpe during his early broadcasting days painted a Sharpe picture, describing a workplace where Sharpe's temper was an open secret. Behind the cameras and away from the spotlight, there were stories bubbling under the surface. Stories that, for years, no one wanted to touch. Everybody around him knew to stay clear when Shannon Sharpe was in one of his moods. According to an assistant who allegedly confided in a colleague years later, it wasn't just loud yelling, it was straight-up intimidation. You felt like you couldn't tell him no matter what. Even though no formal complaints from that time have surfaced, the steady stream of these behind-the-scenes stories casts a long, dark shadow over Sharpe's past and raises some uncomfortable questions. How long had this behavior been tolerated, and why? Fast forward to 2004, yet again, another woman, another explosive incident, and surprise, another charge. This time, it was for allegedly forcing a woman out of his house in a way that was anything but gentle. And just like before, the whole thing got quietly wrapped up, settled out of the public eye, brushed aside like an inconvenient headline. They called it mediation, a private resolution. No trial, no public drama. Just another scandal that faded into the background while Sharpe's star kept rising higher. But here's the thing, the whispers never stopped. They never do.
According to reports, that video will not be released. Attorney Tony Busby came out and said that they are not planning to release that video, how they were dropping audio, because it's a very strong point of their evidence in this case, and they're going to keep it and use it as such.
Court.
Yeah. Now, that is interesting because Shannon Sharpe, remember, he kept saying he believes the video was going to come out. He believes the video was going to come out. So there's been a change.
For every public headline, there were countless other rumors. The kind that never make it into police reports but get passed around in locker rooms, whispered in production studios, and traded in quiet private conversations. And then came the infamous 2010 restraining order, a bombshell at the time. It cracked open the polished armor of one of sports media's most charismatic figures, exposing the mess that had been bubbling just beneath the surface. This wasn't just some bad moment. It was another piece of a long, troubling pattern that people were finally starting to notice. The allegations were explosive, detailed, disturbing, and impossible to ignore, at least for a moment. But just as fast as the headlines hit, the story vanished. The restraining order was dropped, and Shannon Sharpe slid right back into the spotlight like nothing ever happened. For years, it looked like the world had moved on, but Kel Bundy Evans hadn't. She had lived through the aftermath, the threats, the emotional damage, and now, all these years later, she came back with a message loud and clear. She wasn't going to be silenced anymore. What made it all even more unsettling was how similar these stories were. Different women, different timelines, but the same chilling pattern: control, power, and a sense of invincibility. It was like Sharpe truly believed he was untouchable. But this scandal wasn't just about what he'd been accused of, it was about how it had been handled. Over and over again, money, power, and influence seemed to sweep problems under the rug.
Once again, I've never seen anybody handle a situation worse than Shannon and his team. Like they just handled it wrong from the whole beginning.
Quiet settlements, private mediations, and hush-hush NDAs became the go-to weapons, creating a wall between Sharpe and real accountability. And honestly, why wouldn't he believe he could keep getting away with it? When you're at the top, when you've got millions of fans riding for you, when networks are more focused on ratings than responsibility, Who's really gonna stop you? But now, with the past roaring back, louder than ever, even Sharpe's once rock-solid defense strategy was starting to fall apart, and for the first time, the cracks were too big to cover up. Shannon Sharpe's legal team, known for their fierce tactics and media smarts, now found themselves in panic mode. This story had blown up too big, too messy, and way too public to control. Every new revelation, every resurfaced allegation, every leaked audio clip was throwing gasoline on a fire that was spiraling out of control. And as more women began stepping forward, the entire narrative shifted. This wasn't just about Shannon Sharpe anymore. This was about power, privilege, and the systems that let men like him operate unchecked for years, even decades. The victims' voices, once dismissed as lies or exaggerations, were now echoing with a force that couldn't be ignored. Kel Bundy Evans spoke openly about years of manipulation, fear, and feeling trapped by a man who believed he could silence her with threats and intimidation. Jane Doe described a relationship that kicked off with charm and promises, but quickly turned into something much darker. And then came the others, women who had worked with Sharpe, crossed paths with him, or just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their stories varied in the small details, but they all shared one unmistakable thread: a man who wielded his charisma and status like both a weapon and a shield. But here's the twist. The legal battles weren't just happening inside the courtroom. They were playing out right in the court of public opinion, where every single accusation, every leaked text or message, and every carefully polished statement from Sharpe's team was being torn apart and dissected in real time. The spotlight was glaring, and for once, Sharpe's usual playbook wasn't enough to stop the tidal wave coming his way. Social media turned into a straight-up war zone, with fans, critics, and online detectives jumping on every twist and every new reveal. Some die-hard supporters stayed loyal, convinced Shannon Sharpe was innocent, or just flat-out refusing to let go of their idol. But for others, the cracks in his image were becoming impossible to ignore. The Shannon Sharpe they thought they knew was starting to look like nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. And that illusion was unraveling fast. But maybe the most devastating blow of all came with the leaked text messages. These weren't vague or easy to explain away. They were explicit, shocking, and undeniable. The texts exposed a side of Sharpe that the public had never seen before. A side that was controlling, demeaning, and completely at odds with the smooth, charismatic figure he showed on camera. Sure, his legal team rushed to argue that the messages were taken out of context and that they were part of a consensual dynamic. But honestly, by then, the damage was done. Because when it comes to the court of public opinion, perception is everything. And once the public starts to see you in a different light, no amount of spin or legal maneuvering can fully erase the ugly image burned into their minds. And right now, the public's perception was clear. Shannon Sharpe had something to hide. As the scandal kept unraveling, the stakes shot even higher. This wasn't just about lawsuits, lost deals, or pulled endorsements anymore. This was about a legacy, a whole career built on hard work, talent, and sheer personality now hanging by a thread, threatened to be overshadowed by dark allegations that just wouldn't disappear. Sure, Sharpe's defenders were out there, waving flags for his years of success, his charity work, and his massive contributions to the world of sports. But his critics? They were asking the uncomfortable, gritty question: at what cost? How many stories had been buried? How many lives had been affected just to protect a man who seemed convinced he was untouchable? But listen, the story doesn't end here. It can't. Because for every bombshell revelation, there are 10 more questions just waiting to explode. How deep does this rabbit hole really go? How many more voices are still out there, waiting to be heard? And maybe the biggest question of all, what happens next? We want to hear what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. This story is far from over, and trust me, you're gonna want to stick around. See you in the next one.